Hi. I have a broader question. You've talked and introduced or amplified the law of attraction. You've articulated it beautifully. And you've also said that there's no such thing as a law of assertion. And so my question is, if there's no law of assertion and we can't get it wrong, is this a no-fault universe?
Yes. Because when you realize that saying that I never get it done and that I never get it wrong, it's almost like saying the same thing. Because the reason I cannot ever get it wrong is because I never get it done. So if I stand in this moment and something feels wrong, out of that is born a desire that if I focus upon it will then be achieved. So now I have amended my desire and the universe, who always answers, has responded. And so now, even though it felt wrong before, now it has been righted. And that's what we mean when we say you can never get it wrong, because in any moment you launch a new desire and the universe will yield that to you. Even if you say, it would be better to be over there, then you're over there. And then you say, well, it would be better to be over there, then you're over there. And then you say, well, really, it's better to be over there. Some of you are like that. And then, oh, it'd be better to be over there. In other words, whatever you want, whenever you want it, as long as you align with it, the universe will yield it to you. Yes.
Where I was coming from on this question of the no, I'm thinking more, when I say no-fault universe, I'm thinking more of the concept of no-fault insurance.
Yes.
It's kind of an interesting perspective to think about. And my question about that
How does no-fault insurance work?
Well, my understanding, I'm not in
Generally.
the insurance business.
Yes.
But if you insure yourself and the other person insures themselves, their own insurance company takes care of whatever happens to them. And so you don't sue the other, you don't have to sue the other company.
So I've covered myself and you've covered yourself,
Yeah.
and no matter what happens between us, we've covered ourselves.
Yes.
So there's no reason to say you were bad, and there's no reason for them to say you were bad, because everything's covered.
Exactly. The blame
This is a no-fault
and the
universe.
guilt.
Yes, indeed it is.
All right. Okay, so my question, I have the sense from everything that we've been working with you on. My question is, where is the place of restitution in a no-fault universe? And a specific example of that is something that we've been kind of following the story in the news about the tobacco companies, who, one in particular, I think it's Philip Morris, but I'm not sure, had a $1 billion judgment against them, and it's been reduced to $100 million. And I'm thinking, I believe I got this right. It's one person who's going to get this judgment. Obviously, they're making an example out of this case. But where does that, I mean, this is like what's going on now. It's the majority of the thinking. A lot of it seems to be, there's so many examples of this happening. And I just like your take on that. Do they need to do something in restitution, meaning to make good or restore back to previous condition?
Well, that falls into the category that we were describing earlier of having to go back and make all those unmade beds. In other words, that must be the ultimate of restitution, that I have to go back and fix everything that I've ever thought before or done before that was screwy before I can move on. And so we would say that while this is a no-fault universe, that there is no place for restitution within it, because that is in vibrational disharmony with the laws as we know them to be. And that even the recipient of the restitution is actually, in every case that we've seen, giving up far more in terms of vibration than they could ever receive, because in order to justify the restitution, they have to push so hard against what is not wanted that they pinch themselves off from well-being in such a powerful way, and from our perspective, no amount of money could compensate for that. Yes.
So this is the law of attraction. As more and more people become aware of it and it becomes a part of their life, so much is going to change. The ripple effects of this is just phenomenal to think about.
It is so exhilarating to discover the freedom for yourself. The first thing that happens is that you reach this place of not demanding restitution from others, and so there's huge freedom that comes from that. And then the next step is not demanding restitution from yourself. In other words, when you reach this place where you are no longer beating up on yourself either. In other words, no fault means no fault. It means there's no point in pushing against them or pushing against me. In other words, and so when you reach that place where you are truly allowing source energy to flow, then you begin to live your life experience in the way that you've intended as you came forth into this physical experience. And so as you reach this place where you feel the deliciousness of that, there's such joy and ease in that. And then you have the added benefit of watching others catch on to it. And you are able, even if they've not caught on to it, because you are so caught on to it yourself that even though they have not caught on to it, you're not bothered by them not being caught on to it. In other words, you're a allower even when they're not allowing you. Little by little by little, more and more and more and more and more begin to have the experience. And there is another added benefit in this. All of the new little beings that are coming forth are knowing it even more powerfully, and so the dilution ratio is very, very strong.
That's my next. That leads right to my next question. That perspective is of seeing more and more and more people catch on to this and live that is so exciting. And so I want your take on the time frame that you see this unfolding, and I want to qualify that. What I'm looking for in terms of a perspective.
Good.
Communism was a 75-year experiment before the Berlin Wall came down, and the majority of the people on the planet realized that there were better ways to organize people, or that capitalism, because it had to do with selfishness, which is another foundation of what you've all been talking about. You can't suppress it. So that's an incredible perspective to see 75 years, but we can see it from hindsight, from those who were in the middle of that time frame and didn't have that perspective that it's a beginning and an end to the critical mass of thinking. Didn't have the value of that perspective. So that's just what I mean by when I ask about a time frame. I literally mean, how do you see it in terms of years?
Well, before we answer that, we want to ask you a question or two, and that is, in this better feeling time that we are talking about here, do you think that it will be absent of negative emotion?
No, absolutely not.
So you're understanding that the contrast will still be there because the variety will still be there, but that what we are really talking about is more people not being bound by their own negative emotion. We're not really talking so much about circumstances changing. We're talking about people being aware of what negative emotion is and feeling the ultimate freedom of getting to choose how they feel, so that the conditions that surround them don't need to change in order for them to feel better. And then as the conditions around them don't need to change for them to feel better, they feel better, and then the conditions around them change. The reason that we are wanting to lay that little basis of comment first is because we've noticed that in this communism example that you are talking about, that there are fewer happy people there now than were there before, because while the structure of their government has changed, the conditions of their lives have worsened for the most part, because they have shifted the blame, but they're still in a place of non-receiving. In other words, it does not matter what system of government you're living, if you are, as the individual, in a place of pushing against, then you're still not letting in what you're wanting to let in. And so there are many of them that are clamoring for things to be changed back the way they were before, when they had less things to worry about and when there was more stability to their experience. Because while they were not individually feeling like they were able to create, as mass consciousness, they were the creator of that which they were living. It's an interesting thing. It feels like government exists, sort of like God may exist, and that government imposes the decree upon the people, and then the people respond to the government, when actually the opposite is true. The government is born out of the mass consciousness of the people, you see. And so let's talk about even how the democracy that is purported here in your nation came about, because there were people that were living in what began to feel to them like more and more suppressed time. And out of that was born a desire for greater freedom, a desire for more individual choice. And the people that came to that place of strong wanting actually put themselves out of the frying pan into the fire for a while, because as they moved to a new place, there was less security, there was less things in motion, there was less good food, there was less stability, there was less physical comfort, there was less of the physical amenities of life, while there was more joy for the most part, because there was a greater feeling of freedom, a greater feeling of me getting to choose. But it was quite a long time before the comforts caught up with the vision of the leaders, you see. And then when it caught on, it really caught on, it really caught on, until generations of you now are experiencing that feeling of freedom and that feeling of being able to get what you are wanting. But can you feel that percentage-wise? Even when you look at your nation with its magnificent founders who had an idea and then were able to line up their actions and their beliefs with their idea, that the majority of your population is not in vibrational keeping with what they knew. In other words, the majority of your population in your nation of democracy is experiencing every bit as much bondage as the majority of people in the other forms of government, because it is not about the form of government, it is about the individual attachment to the vibration that disallows the well-being from flowing. It is not the easiest thing to teach freedom, even though everybody wants it, because most do not understand, as we discussed in the first question here today, that ultimate freedom is the freedom from the resistance, and that is the only thing that ever binds. And so when you say, can we foresee a time when everybody gets there? We would say instantly we know it, because from source energy perspective, everybody knows it. When you say, well, what's the time frame in the manifestation of it? We say generations, 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 generations. In other words, in fact, we never foresee a time when that which you think you're reaching for will be happening all around your planet, because there is enough diversity that it's going to keep the mix, as our friend said earlier, in that place of very delicious balance where there's plenty of pathos or plenty of variety within it.
That was what my question was. It's when we talk about the universe evolving, constantly evolving, I fully understand what you mean by not wanting to eliminate negative emotion and the mix of the spectrum of things that promote the rockets or that spur on the rockets of desire. It just is such a wonderful experience. It's a curiosity as to where it's going in terms. For example, are there times when more people are going to be aware of it than, you know what I'm saying?
Well, we think the balance
is changing. Or does it just keep going back and forth?
It goes back and forth for this reason. What happens is, the more the individuals feel suppressed, the more their rockets of desire for greater understanding come forth. And the more their rockets of desire for greater understanding come forth, then the more understanding comes, and the more satisfying their lives become, and the more content they become. The more content they become, the more things don't change. The more things don't change, the more desire for change is born. The more desire for change is born, the more diversity in thought comes forth. The more diversity in thought comes forth, the more upheaval. The more upheaval, the more diversity in thought, the more diversity in thought, until it reaches sort of critical mass, when there are enough asking that then the answers begin coming in a stronger way, and then more come back into balance with it. And it's, you see, the thing about your earth-space reality is that it's the perfect balance. In other words, the way the pendulum swings, physical beings talk about the pendulum swinging as if it's a bad thing. And what they almost always mean when they talk about the pendulum swinging is, I liked it when it swung over there, I wish it could have stayed. And we say, you really, really don't, because if the pendulum went over there and stayed, you'd all be feeling complacent, you'd all be feeling bored, you'd all be feeling restless, you would be ready to birth the dynamic rebels of the next generation, you see. And here they come. And so here they're born and they say, whoa, what's up with you old people over there with that thought? We think that's weird, we think that's dumb, we think that's unsatisfying, we choose that, you see.